address, just to give you a
We just need a synopsis,
general overview. This is going to take like 5 seconds. So Initiative 71 is a ballot initiative that voters will vote on this November 4th that will legalize personal possession of up to 2 ounces of marijuana for individuals over the age of 21, and will also allow them to grow 6 plants in their home. We actually could not put tax and regulate, which is the sale and distribution of marijuana, on the ballot initiative due to the fact that it is illegal in the District of Columbia. But we are running this initiative, which is the first time in history for marijuana legalization initiative to be run in a racial justice context. And so as our partners, SEMA's and others have done an excellent job of moving decriminalization from a concept to a reality in the district. The way I have talked about Initiative 71 in the public is that, from a frame of reference as a physician, we've done a lot to stop the bleeding as it relates to marijuana, and that people are not getting criminal records and things of that nature, but we have done very little to address the healing. So looking at ways in which we can be very intentional about being inclusive of people who have been previously harmed by policies of prohibition in what would be a new economic context of marijuana legalization. And so what we are hoping to do after the ballot initiative is hopefully successful in November is roll out a tax and regulate strategy that is inclusive of issues like marijuana record sealing, so sealing people's criminal records from the past for something that is now legal so that they do not face employment discrimination when applying for jobs, taking marijuana out of the pre-employment drug testing screening process so that, when people are employed, then they have to take a drug test and, it may turn out positive for marijuana, they don't get automatically fired. And then, unlike other, like Washington and Colorado, being intentional about being able to be inclusive about people who have had criminal records being involved in the industry itself. And then finally, using the tax revenue from the taxation of marijuana to redevelop those communities that have been harmed by prohibition. And so we're working with Fair Budget Coalition and a whole host of other groups to find specific provisions that would work towards that end. So that's basically the idea in a nutshell. It is popular in the district. We feel confident that hopefully we'll be successful come November 4th. But we would love to engage with you all on a strategy around how we can advance this message in the Black community where the issue is a little less popular than other places, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
So let me just get, for clarity's sake, it sounds to me that there are two, we want to acknowledge our host, Reverend Dr. Joseph Evans, pastor of the church, for joining us. So I just want to be clear that there is a two-part strategy, it seems.
Yes, sir.
The first is to get the Initiative 71 passed, which would allow, again, the possession of how much?
2 ounces of marijuana.
2 ounces of marijuana without consequences.
Yes, sir.
Over that, there would be consequences.
Over that, there would be consequences. That is correct. But basically, it would be particularly. So right now under decrim you have 1 ounce, and when we look at the tickets and where they're distributed, the overwhelming majority of them are in communities of color. But after Initiative 1 would pass, you would have 2 ounces of marijuana for personal possession, and you'd be able to cultivate up to 6 plants in your home and be able to keep the byproduct of those 6 plants. So technically you could have more than 2 ounces, but you could only have 2 ounces on your person at any given time.
Right, and there's an age restriction on this. If you were 16 years old and you have 2 ounces, you're still in trouble.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's almost equivalent to how you regulate alcohol, in other words. It's like the same kind of analogy in some ways.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now the second thing that you raised within which is interesting because it seems that it would be, from the perspective of the Black community, would be great if some of the things that you're looking at for phase 2 were in part of phase 1.
Exactly.
But the reason that couldn't happen was because
it is against the law to put those sort of provisions on ballot initiative in the district.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay, all right, okay. All right, now, I'm gonna give Seema an opportunity to. I'm sorry.
Definitely no.
For you to chime in just in terms of question of impact and how you see this in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, and well, 2 quick points. One, what you said really stuck with me. I am a student of Ron Chisholm and the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Value very much.
That gives you some extra credit. This room, Ron
Yes,
Chisholm.
from the late 90s organizing in New Orleans, and so I value very much the community and the process by which we achieve these policies and the effort to decriminalize marijuana, and the report which documented the racial disparities in arrest came from my conversations with the youth here in DC. As many of you know, I do Know Your Rights training almost every other day here in the district. And so they were the ones who identified marijuana as the pretext for which they were being wrongfully stopped and profiled. And so we attacked marijuana in the district through first showing the racial disparities, despite 50-50 populations between black and white populations, despite nearly equal usage rates. We found 91% of the arrests for marijuana were of black people, particularly black men, east of 16th Street. 16th Street served like a dividing line across the city, which is essentially the park. And east of 16th Street, you saw not only the majority where African American and black residents reside, but the majority of the arrests. There were hardly any arrests west of 16th Street. And if you went to the ACLU NCA website, you'd see that mapped out down to your block. And you can see that despite the fact of George Washington University, Georgetown University, American University,
That's right.
many universities, and we all understand the behaviors of college students, you saw virtually no arrests. So we mapped not only marijuana arrests, we mapped with the Washington Lawyers Committee all arrests in the District of Columbia. And then we took the campaign, as the People's Institute would have advised, and brought it back into the community along with you all and Ron Hampton and Nkichi and others, and we took it to as many places as we could for months on end. And so when we decriminalized, we were thinking not about marijuana, but we were thinking about justice. So now odor cannot be used as the basis to odor cannot be used as the basis to stop and search someone, which is, it goes right back to the reason we began. And the reason an ounce or less is decriminalized, it captured a number of youth who were being charged with possession with intent to distribute. And so raising the bar to 2 ounces really captures a number of youth that are not kingpin drug dealers and cannot rationally be associated with the type of violence that's traditionally associated with informal drug economies. This is a way to protect our youth from the sort of stigma of having these criminal records for the rest of their lives. Yeah.
Oh, no, I wanted to just take the point that you made and say, what happens in the rest of the smell, the odor, right? The police stop the car and they smell marijuana. Everybody in the car don't necessarily have to be smoking, and maybe the people in the car hasn't been smoking, maybe that took place some other time, but the odor's still there. So the practice was to pull everybody out the car and lock them up for smoking marijuana, because it was probable cause. But the decrim legislation eliminated that. So merely the smell of marijuana is not probable cause or reasonable suspicion to make an arrest, which was the case.
So, and throughout this journey, we've continued to use sort of the power of research and study to back up and validate the experiences that we hear people talk about in the community. And one thing that I want to point out with respect to moving for a racial justice marijuana legalization and what that means to me and what I'm learning. One of the things I did is convene people who are trafficking marijuana here in DC and to talk to them individually and together about the role that this income was playing within the community. There was this idea going around that if marijuana was legalized, that it would become big marijuana money for basically white institutions, white corporations, and communities that had been systematically disenfranchised would not get essentially a piece of that. And so one of the ideas that came out of those conversations were the idea of challenging the types of capitalist ownership that are perhaps symbolic of white supremacy in the United States. And could we not just talk about creating entrepreneurs in Black communities for marijuana, but collective ownership. And when we talked about reparations, could we talk about it in a way that created processes where communities actually have the power to decide? So if you say you want to put it back in education, who gets to decide what that means? Does that mean more charter schools, more standardized tests? Like, there should be a process in the community to create self-determination for how those substantial proceeds would be spent. And so I think as we advance in this conversation, the DC, unlike any other of the places that have moved through ballot initiative, we are not permitted to create taxation and regulation structures through our ballot initiative process. So that's a dangerous place to be, because whereas in Washington and Colorado, they had experts write the bill, here you're going to have politicians write the bill. So the bill will be subject to all the political maneuvering and the various power interests. So that's why the work Malik has done, we really shifted to police practices. And the work that they're doing is really important to continue the conversation, to talk about racial justice, not just, okay, here's your $10,000 a year, but to talk about justice in terms of self-determination. How do we use this as a jumping off point to say ending the war on drugs is about self-determination for Black communities, brown communities, indigent communities, and how do we create models of economic justice for the urban environment versus Colorado and Washington, where they have wide swaths of land where people can grow marijuana. Here, can we do rooftop communal houses? Can we take from the food justice movement? So I think that your best ideas, your most creative ideas are welcome in this space. It's an opportunity and a microcosm for us to reimagine power and how that sort of can function in the new marijuana economy. So we're pro-legalization, and yeah.
Hold on a minute. We're going to open it up, but I want to hear from Ron Hampton next, because one of the issues is, again, this is likely to pass, but the question is, there is a strong, in many instances, almost visceral resistance to legalization in the Black community. And I say that because it is, the emotional feelings about what drugs have done to Black people and whatever. So and part of what we are committed to as IBW is education around those issues. I mean, we've had retreats, all kinds of things to deal with that. But nonetheless, that is a reality. And so the de-crim, one people say, well, wow, we did the de-crim, why do we need to move to this next step? I'm just saying this is one of the things will be asked among many people in the community is this smells like, maybe this is like for white people, has nothing to do with Black people, and so that's going to be a major issue. But I want to hear from Ron next, because Ron, I know, has a position on these things and has studied them a lot, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Well, thank you. Personally, I think it's good. I'm on board. I'm going to be on board with it. I'm on board with it now. Malik and I met last week and talked about a couple of strategies in reference to confronting the African American community. And you're absolutely right. There's a hesitation in our community because our community has been conditioned in the wrong way about the whole drug thing, because the condition that has taken place in our community is a reaction to the violence that drugs have demonstrated in our community. Jump out is a perfect example. Nobody wants to get jumped out on, and most of the people, sometimes they get jumped out on, didn't have anything to do with the drug sale that just went down. They just have to be victimized by it. So their reaction to it now is that I don't want that in my community because I'm being victimized. They don't, because they don't understand, they haven't been included in the conversation and dialogue about it. So there has to be some intentional, direct, face-to-face kind of things that should take place in the community to number one, give them the strategy and then answer some questions about it and be available for them. And somebody that's going to have some credibility with them and that's going to be willing to tell the truth and talk about the issue as it's going to hit the ground. I know most of you are probably aware that of the medical marijuana bill, because Washington, D.C. is a plantation. The referendum went through Washington and then went to the Hill, or the bill, and then came back almost 11 years later. And it was 11 years later because it went through the political process. But once it got back here, then it moved pretty rapidly. Out of the 5 that initial permits that they gave, it was either 2 or 3 of the 5 were African American, of which Montel Williams was one of them. And so those are the 5 that's in the city now. And so what I saw in that process was a lack of education and knowledge of the issue about medical marijuana, but there were people who were presented in the sense that the community or some of the ANC people could turn it down and send it back. And the fact of the matter was that they couldn't do that because that wasn't what they were doing. They were looking at the process in terms of where were they gonna put it, not if they were gonna put it there, but where they were gonna put it. So the education that has to take place has to come first, and the dialogue about it, and people really need to be upfront about it. That's why what Simeon's talking about is really important. And I see that changing. So when you look at the white community in the city around marijuana, it's probably like 80% of that community has already endorsed it. They're already walking around the street smoking marijuana now, in probably every other place. In the black community, it's about 50-50. But you're also talking about a younger community. Those older folk are a little more reticent about it as it relates to what it's going to do. But I think that can be dealt with some town hall meetings that we talked about, some literature put in people's hands. I don't know about knocking on doors. I'm sort of, off and on about that. But I think some face-to-face kind of things, working with the religious community, going to some churches, talking to people about it. I can see it moving from 50-50 to a good solid 70%, I think. Because people will then understand what it is, because then you can answer the question. And you have to talk about it in the context of what it has done to our young people. Young people, teenagers,